If you ever wanted to cook a proper roast dinner and live to tell the tale, with a happy family all around, then this is it. Not only will I hold your hand every step of the way, but you'll get some serious goodies at the end of this video. It's a season for giving after all. You'll get a printable prep list with a time schedule you can easily follow. A complete shopping list including all the little things you might forget to buy. A list of tools and equipment, as well as little tips while we cook to make your life a breeze. For you, for free. Cooking a stress-free Christmas or family dinner is a multi-day, well-planned process. If you rush it on the day, tears of sorrow will follow. But you knew that already, didn't you? Day 1. We'll prep the beef and make a much-needed beef stock. We'll start with the star of the show. This year we're doing a standing rib roast, because nothing can beat it when done right, which is exactly what we're going to do. Picking a rib is easy, and the most important part is looking at the fat marbling. Usually, if you buy it in the US, especially from Costco, the package will say USDA prime, meaning a well-matured and marbled piece of usually, but not always, Angus beef.
What's up, bro? Eat me!
Ideally, you want it on the bone, because the fat cap and the meat around the bones are next level delicious. Although, I normally tell people it sucks, so I can have more for myself. Apart from cooking it correctly, we need to brine it. This 4-bone rib weighs 4.5 kilos or around 10 pounds. A mighty fine piece of meat that will easily feed 6 to 8 people. You need a big enough container to fit the meat, as well as small enough to fit into your fridge. The brine is a simple 2% salt brine, meaning you cover your meat with water times the amount of water you used by 0.02 and dissolve that amount of salt in the water. If you want to skip the simple math, you use the same weight of water as you have meat. For every liter of water, you add 20 grams or 1 tablespoon of table salt. Submerge your meat, cover and place it into the fridge for ideally 48 hours. This will allow the salt to evenly season the meat all the way through, and at the same time result in the juiciest meat you've ever tasted. Winner winner, beefy dinner. Make sure your fridge is cleared as much as possible. We needed the space for more important things than a half-eaten slice of pumpkin bread or forgotten bit of butter chicken, both of which I have videos for, by the way, for your easy enjoyment. In order to make a ridiculous gravy, not just the same old lame gravy you had last year, we need to make our own beef stock. The main ingredient here is beef bones. Try and get bigger bones from the joint areas. They will have more collagen and flavor, which is what we want. Preheat your oven to 230 degrees Celsius or 446 degrees Fahrenheit. Lay the beef bones onto a roasting tray and roast them until they are deep golden brown. Meanwhile, we cut up the mirepoix, which is simply the veggies. In restaurants, we roast these too for extra color, but it's not essential and you can just add them as is. All veggies gets a good rinse. And speaking of which, we have a carrot, onion, celery and garlic. I like cleaning up the carrot, but you can leave the skin on no problem. Slice it lengthways, then down the middle, then into chunks or simply cylinders. Next, you clean or not the onions, as well as cut them up into chunks. No need for precision, as they'll cook away and we won't need it later on. Little tip: always have a little tabletop bin close by so you can get rid of trimmings and whatnot straight away. Often I see home cooks covered in a mountain of trim and stuff everywhere, simply because they don't have a quick one-move access to get rid of things. Simple but useful. Garlic we leave mainly untouched, but cut it halfway horizontally. Celery gets a few rough cuts. You'll need a trusty old stock pot for this. Here I have an 8-quart or roughly 8-liter stock pot. Get the veggies into the pot, then follow with a tablespoon of black peppercorns, a few sprigs of thyme, a few bay leaves, and 50 grams or 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Your bone should be ready after about 30 minutes of hard roasting, but times may vary. So this is how they should look. Fully roasted and brown. They will sit in a large pool of rendered bone marrow and fat, which we'll use later on. For now you remove them from the tray. And into the pan they go with the veggies. Do not just throw the bones, fat and all, into the pot. You'll end up with an extremely hard to clean, oily stock. Now, we want a little bits of fond on the bottom of the tray, but firstly, pour off the oil into a separate container and keep it in the fridge for now. I like using red wine to deglaze the pan, but you can use water if you don't use alcohol products. Once deglazed, add it to the pot. Then fill the pot with water until the bones are just covered. Bring this up to a boil, then turn the stock down just below simmer. While it slowly ticks over, you skim any scum and fat that rises to the top. For this, you need a ladle and a bowl. I usually skim every 30 minutes or so. Now, usually a beef stock takes 12 plus hours to make if you use massive bones. But the time is cut to 4 to 6 hours in this case, because we use smaller, more manageable pieces at home. The larger the bones, the longer it takes to extract all the goodness. That gives us some time to prepare a few little preparations we can make well in advance. The trick is to do as much as possible in advance, to the point that everything is easy, and you enjoy the process while simply getting on with life. To make our ultra unconventional and mega crispy roast potatoes sing a song of joy, we make a little rosemary salt. Simple, classy, and endlessly useful. To start, we strip a load of rosemary stalks. We only need the blades, 25 grams or 1 cup's worth. We add it into a blender with 270 grams or 1 cup of salt. If you have a weak blender, then chop the rosemary up with a knife before you add it to the blender. To give it a little citrusy edge, we add freshly grated lemon zest. Blend it very well until you have somewhat of a green salt. Place it into a container and store it in a dry place until needed. And because our roast potatoes need to be glass-shatteringly crispy, yet light and fluffy inside, we start them today. We need roughly 3 to 5 potatoes per person, which seems excessive, but they break up somewhat during prep and people are extremely gluttonous when it comes to these, so rather over than under, otherwise all will be forgotten. And you'll be remembered as Stingy Steve or Tight-Assed Marge, and not in a good way. To make cleaning up easy, you peel the spuds over a piece of baking paper or a plastic bag, whichever makes you feel morally less guilty for burning the planet indirectly anyway. Potato type is extremely important. You want a floury, starchy potato variety like Russet, Idaho, Mary's Piper or King Edward, depending which country you're in. Once peeled, give them a little rinse, then cut them up into quite chunky bits. Some potatoes in half, some in quarter, and some can be left whole, but the ends cut off to create corners and edges. Those corners and edges will become ultra crispy little bits of goodness. Get the potatoes into a pot or pan of your liking. Cover with water and generously salt it. Bring it to a boil on the stove, and once boiling, down to a steady simmer. Speaking of which, keep an eye on your beef stock. Skim any fat and make sure it's ticking along nice and slow. If at any point it reduces too far, just top it up with a touch of water. Your potatoes should be done in about 15 to 20 minutes. But you be the judge. They should be cooked through without any raw center. It's important that you take them as close to falling apart as possible. Prepare a tray that'll fit into your fridge and line it with a piece of parchment. We need to rough up the edges of the potatoes carefully, without turning them into mash. I like grabbing a few at a time and gently but firmly tossing them around a bowl. Once the edges and outside gets a bit fluffed and messed up, you place them onto a tray. Lay them out evenly without overcrowding. These fluffy edges will dry out and will become a golden crispy heaven once roasted, which we'll do on the big day, not today. We still have the most important step left. These go into the fridge to dry out. Fridges are fantastic moisture removers, and moisture is the enemy of crispy. By now your stock should be about halfway there, giving us time for a few more optional but highly necessary sauces. Firstly, a quick freshly made horseradish cream. Start by peeling a stick of fresh horseradish. Then finally grate 100 grams or 1 cup's worth into a blender. Next, the zest of 1 lemon, as well as 1 tablespoon or 15 grams of lemon juice, 1 teaspoon or 3 grams of salt, half a cup or 125 grams of sour cream, as well as half a cup or 125 grams of double cream. Blend that all up until the cream just starts to thicken. It should still be a touch runny, but not stiff. Get it into a container and place it into the fridge until the big day. Next we make a classic Argentine chimichurri sauce. For this we need to chop up 1 packed cup or 60 grams of flat leaf parsley. Leaves and tiny soft stalks only. Bunch it up tightly, then give it a chopping with a sharp knife. Yes, this can be made in a blender, but this way is best. And best is what we're after. Get it into a mixing bowl of your liking. Then crush in 2 to 3 cloves of garlic, 2 teaspoons or 2 grams of dried oregano, 2 teaspoons or 2 grams of red chili flakes, half a teaspoon or 3 grams of salt, around 3 tablespoons or 30 grams red wine vinegar, 125 grams or around half a cup of extra virgin olive oil, and finally a good grinding of black pepper. Mix it all until well combined, then store it in the fridge until needed. Next up, a tiny little thing called Confied Shallots. You can skip it if you want, but it's also a mega useful little condiment to have around. We'll be using it on our greens, so kinda optional, kinda not. Anyhow, we clean up around 8 banana shallots. I top and tail them and cut them in half lengthways. You can also use onion, but shallots are much sweeter and milder. You can chop these any way you want or slice them, but this is the pro way of getting a very fine dice. Separate the layers and keep the cores to the side. Remove any bits of thin skin or outer layers trapped inside. Lay them out flat and give a gentle press. One by one, no rush. You slice them into very thin strips lengthways. Then turn and cut into tiny little brunoise or cubes if you wish. Once you've fried a bit, you get your finely chopped shallots into a little saucepan and cover with extra virgin olive oil. Cook it on a very low heat, stirring often. Make sure the shallots do not get any color on them. They are done when translucent, soft and sweet. Pour it through a sieve and keep the oil for using later on with your roast potatoes or in a salad dressing. Place the shallots in a container and let them cool down before closing and storing in the fridge. Our beef stock should be ready by now, and I trust you remembered to skim the fat. It should have a nice, rich, dark brown color, and about half the pot should be liquid. Pour the stock through a fine meshed sieve to remove any bits. The veggies and bones would have cooked away quite a bit upon inspection. You might have realized we don't salt the stock. That's because salt will hinder the full extraction and also be potentially too salty once reduced, which is why we salt the gravy instead. There might be a few fat droplets floating around in there, which is fine, as you can skim it off the surface once settled and chilled in the fridge. Chill your stock down, then place it in the fridge. Day 1 is finished and you can go and relax. Now the second day is much less intense because we did the heavy lifting already. The smart way to do most things in life. Kinda like going up and down a hill, so you can get other stuff like presents and whatnot ready. To make our pro level gravy, start by cleaning and chopping a large onion. Get it into a pan with a touch of olive oil, but no salt yet. Cook and stir on medium-high, until you have a nice fond on the base of the pan. Don't burn it though, as this will result in unwanted bitterness. Deglaze the pan with 1.5 cups or 350 grams of dry red wine. And importantly, 2 teaspoons or 8 grams of sugar. Reduce that right down until the wine is almost fully evaporated. Add in 1 liter of beef stock, which, if you did it right, would have solidified into a jelly or at least be wobbly. Reduce that on medium by about 2/3 before adding 65 grams or half a stick of butter, 3 grams or half a teaspoon of salt, and whisking the butter into the sauce. It should now be good flavor-wise, but give it a taste for balance, in case you like it a little bit saltier. Because it's a gravy, we also need to thicken it slightly. I like using about 5 grams or 1 tablespoon of cornstarch mixed with a touch of water. Add it while whisking and simmering. It should thicken pretty much instantly and your gravy should be ready. Little trick, pour it into a small saucepan and cover it, so you can simply grab it and reheat it when ready to serve. Next we make our Yorkie batter. Same to popovers in the US. We do the batter now because it's better rested in the fridge overnight, in order to get that nice hollow center and high rise. Into a blender or a jug we add 5 whole large eggs, which is 1 cup in volume, 250 grams or 1 cup of milk, 6 grams or 1 teaspoon of salt, and 150 grams or 1 cup of flour. Give that all a blend or whisking until smooth. Then store it in the fridge until tomorrow. Next, you get a pot of water onto a boil and generously salt it. Also prepare a bowl of ice water. I picked green beans because Brussels sprouts are kinda boring. But if you like the old farty sprouts, then use the same method as for the beans. Top and tail your beans, then get them into boiling water. The water has to boil vigorously, otherwise you end up with brown beans. It'll take about 1 minute to get back up to the boil, once the beans or sprouts are in. You could also do this with broccoli or whatever you fancy. Once the boil restarts, it's exactly 2 minutes. For sprouts the same, for broccoli I like doing a minute less. Once the timer goes, you get your greens of choice into the ice water straight away to cool down. This process is called blanching, and it's used to keep veggies bright and green, as well as make your life easy and enjoyable if it's not already. An easy little way to tell your beans are perfect is to peel them in half. If they break and resist, they still need a few seconds, so check these while they're still in the hot water. Once they are chilled, which will take about 30 seconds, you don't let them sit in the water. Drain them and pat them dry with a paper towel. Moisture is the enemy of storage. Now I also like to go one step ahead and get this into a pan with a few knobs of butter, a few spoons of Confied Shallots, then cover and place into the fridge or balcony in winter until needed. Simply to make my life as easy as possible. If you don't have space, then store the greens in the fridge until needed. Last little jobby today is to prep the carrots. I got some medium-sized bunched carrots, but use whichever you like. Give them a good wash, then peel them gently, so you don't remove too much of the good stuff. You can also leave the skin on, but make sure to scrub them well with a clean dish sponge. If using bunched carrots, clean up the sandy part around the carrot tops. Trim it right down and rinse it well to get rid of any grit. Dentists don't work over the holidays. By the way, you can also use this method with parsnips if you fancy. But with parsnips, make sure to remove the stringy core, otherwise you'll be sitting there chewing bamboo like a panda on heat. Once your carrots are prepped up, you get them into a container and store them in the fridge until tomorrow. Now the biggest and most important tip, before you go to bed, make sure everything is set up for the final day. Set your table, chill the wine, get your serving dishes and utensils all ready. And you won't stress one little bit. On the day of truth, we start by removing the beef from the brine and patting it dry with a paper towel. It'll look a little less red by now, which is completely natural. We can tie it up with a few strings, just to make sure it doesn't pull into some strange position when roasting. It's optional and you honestly don't need it for this method, but let's do it anyway just in case you wondered. To cook it, we place it onto a wire rack, or use some chopped up onions and carrots if you don't have one. This simply helps the bottom cook evenly by avoiding direct tray contact. You also need a temperature probe or meat thermometer, with a little metal cable like this so you can keep track of the cooking. Stick it right into the center of the meat. Right now it's pretty cold, around 3 degrees Celsius or 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Place the beef to the side for now, while we cook the Yorkies and Spuds. We do this so the oven is free later on. And reheating the Spuds and Yorkies later is an easy job. If you have a double oven, then you can do them around 2 hours before your guests arrive. Again, I leave a few free printables for you in the description, one of which is a time schedule so you can stay on track. Heat your oven to 200 degrees Celsius or 392 degrees Fahrenheit. Classically, you use beef tallow, duck fat or regular oil for these. Lately, I've been doing a little bit of research and turns out olive oil is good too, because it doesn't reach smoke point in the oven, and it keeps all the healthy properties. But you use whatever makes you happy. We need to fill each cavity with roughly 1 tablespoon of oil. Then heat the tray in the oven for 15 minutes. Once the oil is hot, you pour the batter into the oil, right into the center, and filled almost to the top. Into the oven they go for about 20 minutes, until golden brown and fully expanded. After this time, you can drain the oil and bake them for a few more minutes upside down, in case you like a fully crispy Yorkshire pudding. You might have a few ugly ducklings in there, but that's okay and fully expected. But don't throw them away, you can have them as a little snack along the way, or serve them to your guests if you're normal and secure. The perfect ones will be nice and round with a hollow center, good for stuffing full of meat and gravy. For now, leave them on a wire rack and reheat when ready to serve. Next up, grab a tray for your roasted potatoes. We can use the beef dripping we saved from the bones. Duck fat, goose fat, chicken fat to make it vegan, or again, I like mixing the beef fat from earlier with some olive oil. The potatoes should now be nice and dry on the outsides, which means we will get that golden crispy potatoes fancy chefs brag about. Heat the oil in the oven for 15 minutes. Then lay out the potatoes in an even layer on the pan. Do not overcrowd them. If they touch, they won't get crispy in those parts. Spoon over and coat fully with fat. Then return to the oven to roast. Still on 200 degrees Celsius or 392 degrees Fahrenheit. While the potatoes are roasting, we cook the carrots. Into a pan goes the carrots, which should be around 600 grams or 1 1/3 pounds. 180 grams or 3/4 cups of water, 80 grams or 1/3 cup of sugar, and 60 grams or half a stick of butter. We'll cover it with something called a cartouche, basically just a piece of parchment paper. Superior to a lid because it keeps the heat in, while at the same time allowing the liquid to evaporate slowly. Set a timer for 15 minutes and cook this on medium-high heat. It should simmer away steadily but gently. Meanwhile, check on your spuds and give them a little flip and coating of oil if needed. Once the timer goes, you remove a piece of parchment and turn up the heat. Reduce the liquid a bit more and taste for seasoning. It should be sweet, savory, and buttery. Add a touch more salt to balance the sweetness if needed. Set aside, ready to reheat before serving. Cook your potatoes until they're about 90% ready. We'll finish them just before serving, so they are beautifully crispy and golden when you sit down to eat. Remove any small broken bits of potato now. They are little treats and will burn if you don't remove them. Remove the potatoes from the oil for now and set it aside. Time for the main event, our beef. Turn the oven down to 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Set the temperature probe in the beef at a target of 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Place the beef into the oven and monitor the temperature rise. This one took about 3 hours, but times may vary slightly. As a guide, I use 1 hour per 1.5 kilo or 3 pounds of meat. If you do it bone off, the time will decrease. During this time, you get your chimichurri into a bowl, a horseradish cream, a bit of mustard if you like, and then simply double check on the stuff to make sure you have everything ready. When the meat hits temp, you remove it from the oven. It'll look strange, colorless, and much like that body you've been hiding in the freezer for a while. But don't worry, the resurrection stone is close by. Let it rest for 30 minutes and whack up the oven as high as it goes. Place the beef back in the oven to bring it to life. Prop up the bones and fat with a little oven-safe container if you like. You can now also get your roasted potatoes back in with a touch of roasting oil. Lay out your serving dishes ready to go. Cutting board and sharp knife as well. Showtime is here. Once your beef is looking mighty fine, roasty toasty and glistening with joy like only a roasted vegan can, place it to the side to rest again. Remove the strings to make carving easy. They'll be burnt anyway, so not much use for them anyway. Turn your oven off and place your Yorkies in there with the potatoes to warm through. Meanwhile, get your greens back on the stove, add a few spoons of beef stock. Heat on high and let the butter, shallots and stock form somewhat of an emulsion. Keep tossing the beans until warmed through. Now, because it's a season to celebrate, I like adding a touch of fresh truffle to this. If you can't find fresh truffle paste or truffle oil is fine. I won't tell if you won't. Grate your truffle in and give it a good mix through. And we're good to go. Heat up your gravy, glaze up your carrots and get them onto a plate or bowl of your choice. Remove your spuds from the oven, dry on kitchen paper and toss with a bit of rosemary salt, which you hopefully remember about. Now all that's left to do is carve the meat. I like taking off the rib bones to make the meat easier to carve, but you can leave it whole as is if you want a show-stopping centerpiece when everyone sits down to eat. The ribs are my personal favorite and the meat around the bone extremely juicy and fatty. You can slice the beef as thick or as thin as you like. Personally, I like around 1 centimeter or just below ½ inch thick slices. What you should end up with is a perfectly cooked rib of beef. Pink all the way through. Guaranteed this will be the juiciest rib you ever tasted. But like I said, my favorite is the bit of meat around the bone, drenched in the tastiest gravy the world has ever seen. But more importantly, merry holidays and go live a happy life.